All right, so we're back. Let's talk about unwrapping the sword part two. We've got it all based out here. Let's get to it. So, um, what we have here is the best way to look at it. We'll just do the unwrap real quick. We'll take a look at it. The problem with the unwrap, the way it's set up, is that the sword, if we did that evenly across all the faces here, let me grab this one. And I think I did it and then for testing purposes. Let me do this. I think before our tools were like pack these, sure, whatever. Okay, like that. Then we have the sword. So, and if we look at the checker on here again, we'll see that the pattern doesn't match. They aren't the same size. I'm not worried about them being different angles and stuff at this point, but we will talk about that in a second. But we do want them the same size. Now, before, what we would do is we'd cut up this object, and we're probably still going to do that, but then we would have a lot of work ahead of us for trying to make sure that the exact colors match and stuff. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but it's a lot easier now, and it's a lot safer to cut up your long object. If this is a long object, keeping it one piece is a lot easier in most cases. What you could do is make this a separate texture, and that way you get more resolution for the sword. But let me show you what happens when I grab everything. You just saw it, but when I grab everything, I say mat, or I say tools, I say pack, and I'll just leave it the way it is. And that's how much is used. If I want to keep these all exactly even to each other, that is how much will be used, because this biggest object cannot get any bigger than this. Once it gets bigger than this, it goes outside of the realm of the mapping. So how do we fix that problem? Because obviously we don't want it to be wasting texture space, because this is valuable stuff. Well, one of the things you could do is you could have, if you have multiple swords, you could put all the blades on one texture. That's one way of doing stuff. Another way of doing stuff, that's a very common way of doing stuff. Another way of doing stuff is to cut up this object. And this is not my favorite way of doing it because it can add more polys, but it'll work for the class that we're going to do. Just realize you want to avoid doing this because it makes your render slower and a couple of other small things. In fact, I'm not even going to use that. I'm going to use Swift Loop, and I'm just going to go from here, here to here, here to here. Sure. And then I'm going to go back into my UV unwrap UVW, and then open it back up. Do this, take a look at it. Okay, so now I have these separate pieces. So if I grab this piece right here and I say break, it just makes it so it can fly off a separate piece. It didn't have those cuts before, so I couldn't do it before. I'm going to take this other one, which is the second version, and say break. So now I've got three pieces. 1, 2, 3 pieces. Four pieces I can count. So I'm going to grab them all, and I'm going to say, again, tools, pack UVs, and just rotates, fill holes, and look how much better that looks. This is the blade stuff, and this is the rest of the things. And if we put those checkers back on here, there you go. So it looks okay. Now you'll see the seams and stuff, but don't worry about that because the program that we're going to use to paint our stuff isn't going to show seams nearly as badly as this does. So the next thing I want to talk about real quick is the grain. Now, what that means is that if we're building a sword, and I'm going to pull up a picture of a sword here, and I haven't really looked, but come on, internet, where are you? Oh, you're over here. And this is where that research comes into play. So I'm going to say wooden sword, like that. If I look at wooden swords, and I'll go to images, and I'll look at it, and I haven't even researched this, I just kind of know what's going to happen here. So I'm going to look at this one now. Let's see some bigger images. So I'm going to go to more. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, settings, tools, goodness gracious, my brain. Let's say large, and then I'm going to take a look at some of these swords. So first off, you can see right here, the grain, even the hand-drawn ones are that way. But if we look at any of these swords, you'll see the grain of the wood is going in this direction. This grain is going in this direction, which may not actually be the best way to have that, but even this one, the sword grain, the grain of the wood is going in this direction, which is correct, this direction, which is correct, and this direction, which is correct. Okay, so why? Why does that matter? What's the big deal? Well, okay, so the reason is because if you have the sword having grains that go this way across the sides of it like this, that is the weak point in the texture. I mean, in the wood. The wood grain is weakest at the places where it splits. While you're going to have less chances to have it splitting this way, you definitely have. Let me find one that was a good one. This is less chances for it to split this way, but if you had the grain going this way, that's where they break off. Okay, so, and that's the kind of stuff you need to think about. I mean, that's the same thing with any wood object, a chair. Go look at a chair. If you have a wood chair in your house, look at the wood chair. You're going to see that different parts of the chair have grains going in different directions. And that's because the grains need to go out towards the sword. Now, this one has a big grain, so you can't tell it as well, but it is still going up towards this edge. And you can see it here too. So, what does that mean for us? Well, that means if I'm going to make this sword correct, and if I'm going to put it, even with metal, by the way, this is the same with metal, but metal has different things that are attributes that matter. But even if I look at this sword and I'm going to say I need the grains to go up and down here, maybe sideways here. I'm not as worried about this. Probably up and down here. This one's I'm not as worried about. But I'm just thinking of this one as the big one that will make a big difference. I probably would do it sideways on this one too. I think, yeah, and then vertical on this one. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty easy, really. Let me grab something simple like this. Let me grab this guy right here. Well, first let me do this. Let me get out of here. I'm going to collapse this to an editable poly again. I'm going to go into my material editor, and I'm going to use a slate still because I haven't taught you guys how to use the other one yet, and we're just going to throw a texture on there. The only reason I'm doing this is so you can see it. You don't have to worry about being able to do this, okay? And it looks like, let me turn this up. It looks like, yeah, let me turn that off. So there you have the grains. Some of them it looks like they're going up and down, but I don't think that's right. Let me have to look at it again, but let me turn this down so the grain's a little bit lower. We'll go to 25. There. So now we can see our grains. And I'll just do one for this. This is where they're meeting that edge. Yeah. Yeah. So one's probably the best answer, maybe two. No, we'll just do one. Okay. So ignore the grays out, but this is the direction that the grain of the wood would be on the object. Now, that means this is wrong. These are right. This one's not horrible, but these look like they're wrong, some areas. This looks like it's right inside of here. So how do we fix that? Well, if we come back into our UV editor and we open it up and we look at everything. So if we look at the blade, let's look at the tip of the blade. And I'll turn on object here. The tip of the blade is laying down in this direction. So that means that the grain of my texture, if I come in here and I look at the grain of the texture, it's going in this direction, okay? So that means that we need this to be facing upwards instead of sidewards because we want the grain to be upwards. So what do we do? Well, we can simply just rotate it and do a snap if you want with the A on, since I have A on. A for rotation snap. These were correct. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. So these are all going in the right direction. They aren't gonna. This doesn't look like wood, but it's the same difference. This right here, I'm not worried about it. I think it probably would be better if it was like instead of rotating it, I forgot the quick transform buttons up here. Just rotate it this way. I think that's a better way for it to go across that way. But I could be totally wrong. We could look and see. Yeah, maybe that may be even better. Okay. So you want the length of it to be the direction that gets the grain in this case. So I'm going to look at this piece right here, and it's not bad. It's fine. How about these pieces? These are right. This piece right here, it depends on if you plan on having it carved out of the same piece or not. If you do, then you might want to just, rotate it, and now they'll be that way. You don't really have to in that case, though, because there's some other things that are going on that make that happen. So I think besides the blade, and that's the important part, the most important part, everything else is in the handle. Everything else is fine. But see, if I don't turn the grain on this, when I use a texture with wood grain, a generic wood grain, I'm going to have to turn the texture specifically for that spot. That's the problem with that. So if I grab this one, these two, these two and this one, which is this one, it looks like the only one that's right is that one. Yeah. So I just rotate them. Now they're all going in the right direction. Well, looks like I messed that. No, it's right. It doesn't update anymore. So there you go. Now they're going in the right direction. This piece I'm not so worried about, but if you wanted to change that piece, you could too. And look, I'm not even worried that they're overlapping really. I'm just moving it because it's a little itchy in my brain. So I'm going to grab this one and see. It looks like it's about right. It's just not perfect up down, which it doesn't need to be. How about this one? This one may be the one that's making me kind of wonk, so I'm going to turn that sideways. Okay. This one too. And I'll just turn it sideways. So now I've defined how everything needs to be laid out, but now they're all separate in. Well, and we're going to be doing more to this after we combine it back together anyway. But here's the deal. We're going to come up here and go to Tools, and we use our UV pack, but we're not going to rotate anymore. And we can fill holes. As long as you don't rotate, it will keep the direction that these are going the same. So I say, okay, and now everything is facing the correct way. Okay, since I've set them up, now they're facing the direct way as best as they can fit inside of there. So yeah, that's what that does. That's the point of doing that, is it makes your grain correctly. And when you're working inside of a 3D object, and when you're working inside of objects, you have to understand where the grain comes. You have to understand where the rust happens. You have to understand how blades get scratched or where they get scratched. And we'll get into that as we get to more texturing. But anyway, back to the front view here. So we have our sword unwrapped to a reasonable level now, but we only have a quarter of it unwrapped. Does that mean we have to do everything? No, I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to do symmetry, flip it,